They weren't the kind of cops who took bribes on street corners or pushed envelopes under diner tables. They were detectives, seasoned, respected, the type the department called results men. Their names were Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito. For years, they walked the halls of One Police Plaza like every other veteran of New York's endless war on organized crime. But behind the respect and the commendations was a quiet arrangement that turned two sworn officers into the mob's most valuable partners. By the late 1980s, the mob war in New York was boiling. The Lucchese family, led by Anthony Gaspipe Casso, was bleeding from informants and betrayals. Casso wanted insurance, someone inside the system who could feed him the names of rats before they could testify. Through a middleman named Burton Kaplan, Casso found what he needed. Kaplan introduced him to two NYPD detectives who could do more than look the other way. They could reach into restricted files, trace witnesses, and erase trails before prosecutors even knew where to look. The arrangement began in 1987. Every month, envelopes with $4,000 were delivered to the detectives, along with bonuses for special work. Special meaning information that led to hits, or in some cases, the hits themselves. Both men were still on duty, still wearing shields, still testifying in court as trusted investigators. On paper, they were decorated veterans of the department. In reality, they were the bridge between the city's criminal justice system and its underworld. The first major casualty of that bridge was James Hidell. He was a young man who'd crossed Casso's path during a failed attempt on the mob boss's life. In 1986, Caracappa and Eppolito allegedly tracked him down, picked him up, and handed him over to the Lucchese crew. Hidell never made it back. His death marked the line they crossed from leaking information to facilitating murder. From that moment forward, they weren't just corrupt, they were operational. Their leaks turned investigations upside down. They accessed confidential lists of informants, tapped into surveillance schedules, and passed word when task forces were closing in on mob properties. They also slipped names to Casso's men that were supposed to stay buried inside the department's files. One of those names, Nicholas Guido, belonged to a 26-year-old civilian who had nothing to do with organized crime. Casso wanted another man by the same name killed. The detectives handed over the wrong file. On Christmas Day, 1986, the innocent Guido was shot dead outside his home in Brooklyn. It was a fatal mistake caused by police intelligence being sold to killers. The list of victims tied to their actions kept growing. Bruno Facciolo, a suspected informant, was found murdered in 1988. Israel Greenwald, a diamond dealer kidnapped that same year, was buried in a Brooklyn garage. Anthony DeLappy, a former Lucchese member hiding in California, was found shot to death in his car in 1990. Edward Lino, a Gambino capo, was executed on the Belt Parkway in November 1990. John Otto Heidel, another suspected informant, disappeared not long after. Each case carried the same fingerprint. Inside information moved from a police terminal to a criminal crew before a warrant could be written. The money added up fast. Between 1987 and 1993, the detectives received more than $375,000 in payments, according to later testimony. Their middleman, Kaplan, handled the transactions, passed messages, and collected proof of the work they did. In return, the detectives protected his operations, shielded his drug shipments, and tipped him off whenever law enforcement started circling too close. It was a self-sustaining system built on trust, greed, and paperwork that no one ever double-checked. Inside the department, nobody suspected them. They had long records of arrests and commendations. Eppolito came from a family of officers. Caracappa was an intelligence man, assigned to the Organized Crime Homicide Unit. He was even the one who created the department's Mafia informant database, a resource meant to protect witnesses that he later used to destroy them. Their reputations were too solid for suspicion to stick. The men who supervised them never thought to ask why certain files were accessed or why certain cases went cold. It took nearly a decade for the truth to surface, and when it did, it was because small details refused to die. Betty Heidel, the mother of James Heidel, recognized one of the detectives who'd come to her home asking questions after her son's disappearance. She didn't forget his face. Years later, when federal agents reopened her son's case, she told them about that visit. Her account matched phone logs and notes found in Kaplan's records. From there, the investigation unfolded piece by piece. Phone calls, bank deposits, testimony, and the kind of coincidences that only look random until someone draws the lines between them. The break came when Kaplan finally turned witness. Facing his own long prison sentence, he testified that for years he'd acted as the go-between for the detectives and Casso. He described cash payments, murders ordered, and files passed. His testimony, supported by records and other witnesses, became the backbone of the federal case. The story shocked even veteran prosecutors. Two active or recently retired detectives had been running a private intelligence service for one of the most violent mob families in New York, and getting away with it for years. In 2005, the federal indictment landed. It charged Caracappa and Eppolito with racketeering, murder, kidnapping, obstruction, and conspiracy. In April 2006, a jury found them guilty on all counts. Both men sat motionless as the verdict was read. No denials, no visible reaction. After appeals and legal delays, they were sentenced to life in prison in 2009, and the convictions were upheld a year later. The Department of Justice called it one of the most significant breaches of public trust in the city's history. To the families of the victims, it was confirmation that the system had finally recognized what they'd been saying all along. For the city, the reckoning came later. New York eventually paid more than $18 million in settlements to victims' families, a silent acknowledgement that the damage extended far beyond the two men in uniform. Inside the NYPD, reforms began again. The lessons weren't new. They were the same ones learned after every major scandal, from the Knapp Commission in the 70s to the Mullen Commission in the 90s. Oversight tightened, access logs were tracked, terminals were monitored. The city created the Commission to Combat Police Corruption to audit sensitive divisions. But no policy could erase the fact that two of the department's own had turned law enforcement into a criminal service. By the time both men died in federal custody, the story had already entered the city's darker folklore. The idea that sworn detectives could operate as paid killers for the mob felt too big to fit into the usual categories of corruption. It wasn't about envelopes slipped across desks. It was about structure, about how easily access and authority can be sold when the people holding them stop believing in what they're supposed to protect. That's the real weight of it. Because in New York, the mob was never just men with guns. It was a system that fed off cooperation from inside the walls that were built to stop it. Every time a cop passed a name, a lawyer looked away, or a politician traded silence for peace. The line blurred a little more. These two detectives didn't invent that game. They just played it better than most, until they couldn't. What they left behind wasn't just a case file or a string of dead men. They left a warning about what happens when power and access become currency, about how easy it is for justice to stall when the gatekeepers sell the keys, and about how long it can take for the truth to surface once it's buried under bureaucracy and fear. Even now, there are detectives in the city who remember them, not fondly, but as a story you mention to rookies. A story that starts with two men who looked like heroes, spoke like professionals, and worked for the same people they were supposed to destroy. A story that proves sometimes the hardest criminals to catch are the ones with shields on their chests and keys to the evidence room.